It's always a pleasure to come to Alberta. I love coming out here. Calgary, Edmonton, Red Deer, been up to Fort Mac. It's great. You know, the thing I like about Alberta, and you know this well, so it's a bit of flattery, I guess, but the truth is that, that there's just a can-do and will-do attitude in this province that is unlike any other province in this country. And I've traveled a lot, but you don't see it anywhere else but here. So it's wonderful to be part of that and wonderful to feel it and to be here. So thank you very much for having me. My job today is to talk about Blue Ocean strategy. Blue Ocean strategy comes out of INSEAD University. A couple of professors there at that university, which is the leading business university in France, and by some count, about the 5th leading in the world. These professors, Chan Kim and René Mauborgne, began to ask themselves a question, and that question was, why are there no business books on how to create new businesses that will create new market value? And they did some research over 100 years or so and as many industries, and they see that there is really no literature. So they began to work on it. And the question is, how do you create a company that is a game changer? A brand new value proposition that didn't exist before. How do you create that? And they wrote a book called Blue Ocean Strategy. And they defined two oceans, red oceans and blue oceans. Red oceans are the ones most of us work in. They're mature industries. The customer base is defined. The value proposition is pretty clear. And we fight among each other for market share. You see market growth at plus or minus 1, 2, 3, 4% a year, and everybody's fighting for that market share. That is a red ocean. It's very mature, the prices are pretty stable, the customer base is very much defined, and that's where, as I say, most of us live and work. A blue ocean, on the other hand, is where you create a business that has a whole brand new market value, a value proposition that wasn't in the market before this. And when we think about it, every single industry started that way. Every single industry started with a couple of guys, literally or figuratively, in a garage, thinking about a new idea, and they launched that new idea, and the value proposition hadn't been seen before, and on that, off it goes, and it grows with some success, and then another company joins, and another one company joins, and then that's how an industry begins to become mature. The beauty of starting that, though, is that when you do enter that market space, there is no competition. By definition, there isn't any competition. You're the first one in. And because there's no competition, you have an opportunity for margins and an opportunity to stabilize and grow the business, not in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5% a year, but in double and triple digits. It can grow very rapidly if there's market acceptance. And that's Blue Ocean strategy. My job here today is to show you some examples of that and suggest to you that there are ways, if you are in a red ocean and perhaps want to think about this, there are ways of actually creating your own new business, which in fact should lead the creation of an industry. So let's talk about the second cup for a moment. Before that, just by way of perhaps introduction, I'll talk about myself. Well, before that, let's talk about George. George just was working in a red ocean. George ran a chicken franchise, very large chicken franchise, headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. Worked very hard all of his life and created a very successful business. And he went to his board one day and he said he'd like to take a sabbatical, and he and his wife were going to go off to Europe for 3 months. And the board agreed, and off they went. They traveled all over Europe, and at the end of their travels, they got to Rome. And because of George's prominence, he was able to get an audience with the Pope. So on the appointed hour, he and his wife went in and met with His Holiness, and George, after a bit of conversation, said, "Your Holiness, I'm not of your faith. However, our board has recognized the Catholic Church as a moving force in the world and would like to make a significant contribution to your efforts." And His Holiness said, "Gee, that's very generous, George. How much?" George said, $100 million. Paul said, "That is very generous. Thank you very much." And George said, "But there is a catch." He said, "We're in the chicken business." He said, "You know where you guys say, 'Give us this day our daily bread'?" Well, so I can't do that. But $100 million, I'll call the cardinals together. So he did, and he called all the cardinals together and said, "I got some good news and bad news. The good news is we've been offered $100 million. The bad news is it looks like we're going to lose the bakery account." That's a red ocean strategy. Trying to get a little market share. Well, I grew up in Montreal West, a small English enclave. You saw me when I was 13 years old. You said, "You're going to be like his dad." My dad was a plant manager. We lived in a nice part of town, 2 brothers and sister. That was my future. But at 13, I discovered alcohol. I didn't know that I had a problem with it, but it soon turned out that I did. By the time I was 18, I was in serious trouble. And by the time I was 21, my father sat me down in the den of his home and said, "Frank, for the good of the family, you got to go. You're destroying the family. Your mother's tired of clearing up your bounce checks on Westminster Avenue, and your brothers and sisters don't want to bring their friends home anymore. They don't know what shape you're going to be in. I'm tired of the courts, the wrecked cars, the lawyers. You've got to go. Furthermore, I want you to leave and not be in touch with any member of the family until you fix your problem, whatever your problem is." He said, "I want you to leave today." He said, "Now I've done one thing for you. I got you a job." Turned out he had a colleague in Montreal who had a paint company, and they needed a salesperson in southwestern Ontario. So he said, "I got you that job. Goodbye and God bless." So I got in my broken down Volkswagen and headed out the 401 and full of guilt and remorse and shame, and got closer to Toronto full of enthusiasm for the new job, and I'll show them and I'll be the best salesman there ever was. Rented an apartment in Oakville, Ontario, and started making the calls, and it worked as you'd expect. I made the calls, got the orders were shipped, and I got paid. But after 3 or 4 months, I started to drink, and before long, I lost that job, and then the next job, and the next job. And the last little job I had was delivering flyers on the streets of Toronto. The apartment became a basement apartment, became a rooming house, became a flop house. Somewhere along the line, I just left I lost all of my belongings. I remember at one point taking the few meager belongings I had to Union Station in Toronto, put them in the locker until I found some place to live, and never went back to get them. I was living at the corner of Shooter and Jarvis Street in a flop house. 50 cents a night, 3 guys to a room. The rule was if you tied your shoelaces around your ankle, otherwise the first guy up got the best pair of shoes. There was a guy named Izzy Rangowitz. Izzy had a store at the corner of College of Stina, also not the best part of town. The name of the place was Exclusive Paints. The only thing exclusive about it was the sign. But Izzy said to me, he said, "If you show up for work, you don't have to, but if you show up to work, I'll pay you $5. Now, you stay an hour, I'll pay you $5. You stay a day, I'll pay you $5. Stay for lunch, I'll buy you lunch." He said, "With $5, you can't hurt yourself too badly." He saved my life. I didn't know it at the time, of course, and neither did he, but he had a radio on in the store, and it only played one station, CKY, and in those days, it was a commercial for alcoholism. And it said, I don't know what the commercial said, but the tagline said, "If you have a problem with alcohol, call us. We're in the book." My job was to carry paint cans up out of the cellar and put them on the shelf, and I'm sure somebody had to reorganize them, and I would do that. And I kept hearing that commercial, "Call us, we're in the book. Call us, we're in the book." Didn't mean anything to me at the time. But a few months later, December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas, 1971, I stood in the park waiting for the other 2 guys to come out to panhandle, and I just couldn't go any further. I came to the end. Oh, I don't mean I could have drank some more, gotten more fights. That I could have done. But it seemed to me I couldn't trade off my soul anymore. It seemed to me that I was trading off every value that my parents had taught me as a kid, and I just couldn't do that anymore. Call us, we're in the book. I panhandled, I got a dime. Made a phone call, and I never had another drink. Now, I think about that dime sometimes, and I think about that guy. I was standing at the corner or somewhere on Yonge Street panhandling, and some guy went by. He didn't know me, of course, and I didn't know him. And he put a dime in my hand. And on that dime, I built the rest of my career. I built my life out of that dime. So I hope that whatever karma there is in the world, that guy is rewarded time and time again. He has no idea, of course, the impact that he made when he gave me that dime, but that dime changed my life. And I made a call, and I never had another drink, and for the first 6 months, I was completely unemployable. My synapses weren't working very well. But after 6 months, the guys took me up to the X-Toggery. The X-Toggery is a place that sells used clothing. They took me up there, and they said, it's time you got a job, and they bought me a plaid pair of pants and a plaid jacket and a green. I haven't worn green since. And off I went to get a job. Now in 1971, or 70, whatever, 71, 72, there were no cell phones. I didn't have an address, and the top of my CV was panhandling. This is going to be a challenge. But somebody took a chance on me, and I got a job. And before long, I got another one, and another one, and another one. Before long, I was working in Oakville. Now, this is Blue Ocean strategy, and I'll get there in a moment. But I was living back in Oakville, and I had an apartment. And in 1974, there was an election called, and there was a guy in Oakville whose name was Frank Philbrook. He was a physician in town, just came back to town after being overseas for a number of years, and he had set up his practice about 6 months before. And he and his young family had settled in Oakville, and he decided to seek the Liberal nomination for the riding of then known as Halton. And because he was late to the party, he didn't have anybody to run his campaign, and he'd heard somewhere that I'd had some experience. He came and knocked on my door and said, would you run the campaign? And I said, sure, full of hubris. And then did the research to find there had not been a Liberal elected in that riding since 1867. This was going to be a push. Off we went to run the campaign, and in 3 days into the campaign, a guy walked into the committee headquarters and said, I'd like to help. I said, what can you do? He said, I can raise money. I said, you're great. I said, I need a finance chair. He said, what do I need to do? I said, you got to raise money faster than I can spend it. And the race was on. Well, for whatever reason, the election went very well, and Frank was elected, and off he went to Ottawa. And Tom and I looked at each other. His name was Tom Culligan, and said, we do this so well, we should go into business for ourselves. Now we were both single, both 29 years old. He was out of the shopping center industry, and I was selling construction equipment, and we had no money. I had bought a $1,000 Canadian savings bond, and that's all the money we had. We weren't going to have mergers and acquisitions, I can tell you that. Well, we talked to a bunch of friends, and we found ourselves in Grimsby, Ontario, a little town around back of Lake Ontario that's probably today not more than 5,000 people. In those days, maybe 1,500. And a guy lived there. His name was Ron Gdansky. And Ron was an inventor. He had patents all up the yin-yang, and he decided that, and he had invented a number of things. And one of the things he invented was a simple plastic coin sorter. And he said, you can have the right to sell these in Canada. He was selling them in the States. Perfect for a guy with $1,000. All I needed was an envelope, some flyers, and some stamps, and away you were in business. Turned out the market, are you waiting for this? The market for Catholic Church, or I'm sorry, the market for coin sorters was Catholic churches. Who would have thunk? We hand-addressed envelopes. You remember how long it takes to hand-address envelopes? Hand-addressed envelopes. We had a little house on Lakeshore Drive that we shared, and there was a ping-pong table in the basement, and we sat there and we hand-addressed envelopes all day long. Finally got about 580 envelopes hand-addressed and stuffed and stamped, and took them over to the post office, stuck them in the post office, and held our breath. First day, nothing. Second day, nothing. Third day, nothing. Fourth day, our mailbox filled up with orders. Opened the envelopes, $39.95. Never forget it. Cashed the checks, sent out the goods, and filled up the fridge. And as food in the fridge went down, we sent out more mail, and that was our bookkeeping system. We were naive. So anyway, one day Tom, I told you he'd been in the shopping center business, and I'm getting to the second cup. Tom got a call from a former colleague in the shopping center business. His name was Bill Seelye, and Bill ran Scarborough Town Centre, among other shopping centers in Toronto and across the country. And he said to Tom, he said, look, when you were running Burlington Mall, you leased a space to a couple who opened a coffee store. Would you go over and see if they would open a coffee store in Scarborough Town Centre? We have a space in the food court, be a great space for them. Tom said, sure. So he went over and he talked to them, and he said, the Scarborough Town Centre is one of the finest shopping centers in the land, best dollar per square foot in the GTA. There's a space available for you. Would you like to open another coffee store? I looked at Tom and said, geez, we just had a baby. Traffic in Toronto is crazy. Burlington and Scarborough a long way away. Business is not very good. So no. So Tom came back to that little house we shared on Lakeshore Drive in Oakville and said, Frank, Scarborough Town Centre is one of the finest shopping centres in the land. Best dollar per square foot in the GTA. Let's go in the coffee business. So with all that research done, we went in the coffee business. It was a disaster. What was the coffee business like? Well, the coffee business in those days, first of all, a coffee store, this was just opening a business. This was not changing the world. This was not a blue ocean. This was as red an ocean as you can get. In 1975, coffee consumption was declining at 14% a year. People weren't drinking coffee. Why weren't they drinking coffee? Because it was terrible. Our major competitor in those days was Taster's Choice, arguably not coffee at all. If you wanted a cup of coffee and you were out, you went to a restaurant, you sat down. If it was lunchtime, the waitress hated you. You sat down, you ordered your coffee. They took it off the bun maker and they filled your cup. Now that coffee could have been on the burner for 2 weeks, 2 years, who knew? The stuff was terrible. People were moving and migrating to soft drinks. So coffee consumption, of course we didn't know this. We hadn't done much research. All we had was a space. So coffee consumption was declining at 14% a year, and the coffee stores in those days was a terrible red ocean, a very elite business. It was designed for people who wanted to make their own blend. They'd come in and they would order a little bit of this bean, a little bit of that bean. They would make their own blend. We would keep records on those index cards because there were no computers, and they would repeat the order maybe 2 months, 2 years later. I mean, it was a terrible little business. And we didn't have a bookkeeper, so we opened 2 more stores and lost money even quicker. I'll never forget it. The first day, we had this wonderful kiosk designed in Scarborough Town Centre. There were bins in the counters, and the bins were labeled Colombian, Brazilian, Kenya, and so on. And the first day we ordered our coffee, it came in paper sacks. They were lined, and on the outside would be stamped Kenya or Brazil, and you put the Kenya and the Kenya, the Brazil and the Brazil. Pretty simple. We got very lucky. We realized we needed to hire somebody, so we hired a woman who knew something about coffee. God bless her. And she took one look at the coffee bean. She said, oh, they're all the same bean. The guy just changed the stamp. So business was terrible. And we knew we had to do something. These were 10-year leases, so this is going to be very painful. So we needed to do something. So we did what any entrepreneur would do when they're in crisis. We went and had an ice cream. Went to Baskin Robbins, in fact, and had an ice cream. Now, Tom and I went in, and we sampled some ice cream. We came out, we ate our ice cream, looking across the second cup, and 3 ideas, one of which created a billion-dollar industry. First idea was, why don't we put a coffee maker on the counter and let people sample the coffee? They'll see it's good, they'll buy more beans. Still focused on beans. Second idea was better. Let's charge for the samples. And the third idea, which really did create a blue ocean, why don't we charge more for our coffee than anybody else in the mall so people will know they had a good cup of coffee? Worked like a charm. People lined up and never went away. Think about it. That decision was absolutely strategic and crucial. We could have charged less because our cost of goods was less, but we charged more. We premium priced it. And what happened instantly, and I only know this in retrospect, we certainly didn't know it at the time, was that we now began the relationship between the customer and the coffee changed instantly. It was now about treating themselves rather than a beverage. It was now about a treat. And I'm sure there are lots of people in this room in the last week have spent $2, $3, $4, $5 for a cup of coffee. Nothing to do with a cup of coffee. Had everything to do with treating yourself. And out of that grew a multi-billion-dollar industry. In fact, statistics will tell you that coffee, where it was declining, is now growing at 7.5% still. This is 35 years later. And by 2015, there will be 50,000 gourmet coffee stores in the US. And the growth continues. And the margins, as you will all know, continue to be very strong some 35 years later. When we introduced coffee by the cup, we went from a red ocean to a blue ocean. We were all alone. There was nobody doing it, nobody else doing it, so we could set our own prices, we could set our own rules, and the market was completely undefined. Unlike a red ocean that is clearly defined, a blue ocean is undefined. For example, our first customers, of course, were people who drank coffee, who ordered coffee and went to the local food court and bought their coffee at 20 or 25 cents a cup. Those were our first customers. What we began to do is began to attract people who were not drinking coffee, who had left, who had migrated away into soft drinks, or had never, in fact, had coffee at all. New generation who had started out in soft drinks. So what happened is the blue ocean began to expand, and the market space began to define itself. And we grew that business because the margins, of course, in liquid coffee are significant. If you think about it for a moment, the margin on a cup of coffee where it's mostly water is pretty good. I was just down the hall here, and a regular coffee, Starbucks coffee at the walk-in store down here is $2.75 for a glass of water that's heated up. Pretty good deal. The margins are still pretty long. And here it is many years later. Now, it took 9 years for Starbucks to introduce coffee by the cup after we had. We put ours in 1976, 1985, Starbucks poured their first cup of coffee in a store. So there's a lot of inertia with the regular players in the industry. So if we can start a blue ocean, creating a new value proposition for our customers or clients, you get to set your own rules, you get a long runway, and you get decent margins and growth in the double and triple percentages. We grew our stores. We got up to 6 stores. Now, people will laugh at you oftentimes when you're in the beginning of a new market space. They'll say it can't be done. Just tangentially, think about the guy that was trying to raise money for the courier business. Tell me this again. You're going to deliver packages for $5 when the post office will do it for 25 cents. How does that work? Well, we know how it works. Works fine, thank you very much. When you create a new market space with a new market or value proposition, the world's your oyster. We got up to 6 stores. We were offered our 7th store in Eaton Centre, Toronto. We already had a store in Eaton Centre, Toronto. Second phase, they offered us a space in the second phase because we were obviously doing very well in the first phase. We went to our bank, who will remain anonymous, has a green sign, and we went to the bank manager to borrow a little money to open the store. And with great prescience, he said, with 6 stores, you saturated the market for coffee stores in North America. So people won't always believe that you're in a blue ocean. You've got to believe you're in a blue ocean. And how do you know if you're in a blue ocean? Your customers tell you. When we opened our store at Scarborough Town Centre, we were opening because of opportunism. We had an opportunity because it was a great location, and the demand came from the shopping center. They wanted to improve their kinds of businesses in the shopping center. Their mix is the word I'm looking for. They wanted to improve their mix. So the demand was driven from the shopping center and opportunism. When we introduced coffee by the cup and the lineup started, now customers were telling us. Customers were voting with their money. And that's how we knew we had a business. And we grew that business. We changed banks, of course, and on we went. At 70 stores, I sold it. The next business I want to talk about briefly is ProShred. ProShred is a mobile shredding business. We were the first guys to put a shredder on a truck, a new value proposition. Until then, if you wanted to shred documents, you either had your documents in storage, and the storage company had a large shredder, and you indicated what documents you wanted shredded, and they would do that, and you would know they were shredded, or think you knew you were shredded. You had no idea because you weren't there. The other alternative was, if it was needed security, you double bagged it and sent it to the garbage, and if it was really needed security, you triple bagged it, and off it went to the garbage. And that's what most people did. When we introduced a shredder on a truck In retrospect, a brilliant idea, but at the current time it was difficult because we had no customers. We had an idea, we had a shredder, and we had a truck. The shredder was wrong and the truck was wrong, but that's irrelevant. Our first customer, God bless them, was Bell Canada. They recognized the need for security about telephone records, and they wanted to have things shredded, and to send them off-site was a risk to them because we had seen in the paper many times garbage bags falling off trucks, bank statements found on the road, those kinds of things. They didn't want to take those risks, and their governance was very high. So they wanted the shredder, they wanted documents shredded, and because we could drive up to their location, they could watch and know they were shredded. Now, I said it was the wrong truck and the wrong shredder. Of course it was. We had one of those snap-on tool kind of trucks, and we had a shredder that was kind of a chopper that we had invented. And when I walked out of my office 2 blocks from the Bell Canada offices in downtown Toronto, I could hear the shredder running 2 blocks away. This wasn't and then it was, when I got there, it was a chopping thing, and because of that, the whole truck was doing this, and rivets were popping. I mean, it was terrible. But the customer loved it because they knew it was shredded. Now, the market was tiny. The market, we were in a blue ocean, and as I said, when you get to blue ocean, your market space is completely undefined. You don't know, really, who the market is. You have an idea, but you don't know. So we knew Bell Canada, we knew a couple of firms that were doing shredding, but most people were not doing shredding. So who was the market? Well, the market began to define itself because people started to call and they saw our trucks, and one thing led to another. And now you'll go into most buildings in major cities of this country and you will see these shredding boxes holding documents for shredding. They've become ubiquitous, but it was a market we had no idea what the parameters of the customer base is. The only way we could find that is to get into business and find it out, and it began to define itself. Again, the margins were very long. There was no competition. We could set our own rules, and we could grow our business. Sold that business 11 years later to Iron Mountain, and off it goes. The cornerstone of Blue Ocean strategy is value innovation. Think about the stories I just told you. In the second cup, we had a little kiosk in the center of the mall. Everybody else that was selling coffee had to have a restaurant. It had to have all the equipment associated with the restaurant, and if it was in the food court, no space, but if it was in a standalone, there had to be the space. All we needed was a coffee maker, about $100. Reducing the cost to us of delivering the service, while at the same time increasing the value to the customer by providing them choice of country, choice of strength, fresh coffee, and a myriad of things like that, which increased value to the customer. That sweet spot is what we're looking for. That's creating a value proposition. It makes it work for the company, makes it work for the client, and there you have value innovation. That's where it begins to change. It works for everybody. So, how do you get there? One of the things you can do is you begin to, and just make a note of this because I'll come back to this. What can we eliminate? With Second Cup and ProShred, with ProShred I didn't have to have a big warehouse and filing systems and big shredders or any of that. I just needed a truck with a shredder. What could I eliminate? Eliminated the building. Had a truck with a shredder. What could I reduce? What could I create? And we'll come back to this. What could I raise? What could I create? How many of you know Yellowtail wine? Yeah, always the same case. When I ask that question, everybody knows about Yellowtail wine. Do you know the story about Yellowtail? Chan Kim, the writer of the book Value Innovation, was giving a talk at Davos World Economic Forum in 1997, talking about value innovation. The chairman of the wine company that owns now Yellowtail Wine happened to be there. He was from Australia. He was in the wine business in Australia, sort of a mid-range producer of wine. He wanted to come to the big, lucrative market of the US. Well, the US was a red ocean. The US, in the wine business, there were 2,500 wineries in the US, now far more than that, but in those days, 2,500. And 5 of those wineries owned 75% of the shelf space in wine stores. And here's these guys in Australia wanting to come to Canada, the US rather. Here's what happened with value innovation. In just 2 years, so by 1999, number 1 import in the United States, number 1 red wine, outsells all the French, and so on, because they used value innovation. They created a new value proposition. They didn't compete for wine drinkers. They weren't even trying to engage wine drinkers. Their research told them that the unsophisticated person who's looking for a bottle of wine, and that's most of us, would walk into a wine store and see 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 bottles of wine, entirely intimidated, and walked out with a case of beer. They didn't know what to do. So they made a fun label, Yellowtail. Reduced cost by making only 2 kinds of wine, red and white. They used the same size bottle and changed the label, used the same size boxes, they used the same shipping systems, the same everything. They reduced their cost, created value, and they spent no money, underlined, $0 on marketing. All the other wine companies in the world, or certainly in North America, spent all their money on marketing in magazines and newspapers and TV, and they talked about vintages and the particular grape and the hills and all that lovely stuff. Yellowtail said, if you carry our wine, we'll dress everybody in the wine store in really nice Australian outback uniforms. And so that was their marketing cost, uniforms for the wine stores. So when you walked in and you didn't know what to buy, what do they want to sell you? Yellowtail. And there's the results. Everybody knows Yellowtail. Value innovation. They created a new value proposition and were able to own a market space. It's very powerful. Cirque du Soleil, we all know Cirque du Soleil. Great operation. Great operation. Guy La Liberté. For God's sakes, he was a stilt walker. He worked, I mean, it does take brilliance, but it takes passion, and it takes leadership, and it takes a sense of knowing where you're going. He decided, when he looked around the circuses in town, it could be a better way. The circuses, when he was in business, where they had animals, and they usually set up a tent in a shopping center or something like that, or downtown, and the market was dads and moms and their kids. And the average price was $15, and in you went. Got an hour's entertainment, and out you went. It was a terrible little red ocean. I don't know what price you paid the last time you went to Cirque du Soleil, but I think I paid about $150 a ticket. And what did he do? He created a value proposition that changed the world. He created a billion-dollar industry by doing what? Eliminating, I told you I'd come back to this, eliminated all-star performance, eliminated the animal shows, the aisle concessions, the monthly, he eliminated all of that. It was all great. The biggest cost in a circus is animals, animal trainers, and vets. And they eat every day, by the way. I know my daughter's in show jumping. Oh my God, what sin did I create? And what did he reduce? All that slapstick stuff. The clowns and the running around, he reduced the slapstick. He created a theme. The beauty of a theme is he could play it over and over, and then he could have a new theme, and he could do another one, and so on and so forth. So it was completely sustainable. He created a theme, lovely environment, but kept the tents, kept more comfortable seats, but kept the tents. Multiple productions. My God, if you go to Vegas today, probably 5 Cirque shows all happening. Lots of music and dance, and a unique venue. Brilliant. Reduced cost, increased value, value innovation, sold a third of his company to the Saudis for $1.5 billion. A new idea. And as I said, I was in Vegas recently and went to a show, and the prices haven't taken any beating at all. They're still expensive. The beauty of a value innovation, and if you have the courage, the leadership to do it, anyone can do it. Samsung, to give you another, same economic conference, same discussion, same Chan Kim, making the same comments. The chairman of Samsung, if you read Fortune magazine actually it's a couple of years ago now, he will tell you, and he said clearly, that he credits the success of Samsung to value innovation. He goes on to say in that article that in 1997, I think this is an exaggeration, but in 1997, Samsung was a rather poor manufacturer of black and white televisions. Value innovation has taken them to surpass Sony. Sony was the leader, now Samsung is, and their margins are significantly better. Value innovation. And look at how quickly it went. And what he did was really simple. He didn't try to change the whole company. He went to a small division, and he found a champion, a leader and a champion, sometimes the same guy, but the leader and the champion are critical to this. He found a champion that was running a small division, and he gave him the resources and the time. He said, do it. Now, there isn't a single product today that comes out of Samsung that does not go through what they call Value Innovation University in South Korea. Every single product has to meet the tests in the book. This is very powerful. And I know there's some of you in this business that are in a very tough industry. Some of you are struggling with some of trying to get market share and trying to expand your business, and how do you do it? There's nothing wrong with the red ocean, by the way. There's absolutely nothing wrong. There's lots and lots of big companies that are doing very well. 2, 3, 4, 5% growth is tremendous. Well, 5 would be tremendous. 2 and 3 is great. And they're getting along fine, and there's lots of books on how to manage that and manage your cost and logistics and all that sort of stuff. All that is fine. But if you want to move into a blue ocean, it takes commitment from leaders and a champion within. As I said, sometimes the same, and we'll get to that in a moment. It works in all industries. Just quickly, I started Street Kids International. How much time I got? Okay, Street Kids International. I met a guy in an airplane. He was telling me about Sudan, and the capital of which is Khartoum, and 10,000 kids on the street, and it was 1985. And the kids had a slogan, "My mother the street." I'm making this very short. "My mother the street." And it turned out that World Health Organization was testing many of these kids, and 23% were HIV positive. They were dying of AIDS. Kids 10, 11, 12, 15 years of age, and they were dying of AIDS. Peter had the experience of going over to the US Embassy and borrowing a Tom and Jerry cartoon. Brought it back to the shelter that night, and a dozen kids in the shelter. They saw it over and over, and next night 100 kids, next night 1,000 kids. They wore out the film. The idea that came to us on an airplane is, why doesn't somebody make an animated film that delivers a health message to kids, and to make a short one or a long one? We did that. And the World Health Organization targeted 40 million kids to see that film. Kids live because 2 guys met on an airplane. Don't tell me you can't change the world. You can change the world. It was a completely blue ocean, never been done before. It dominated every AIDS conference. It showed in every continent, every country, every language. It has been the most successful film in the not-for-profit organization ever. I founded CANFAR, Canadian Foundation for AIDS Research. In 1985, there was AIDS, AMFAR had started in the States, and some people thought in Canada we should create CANFAR because there's a whole bunch of little organizations that were fraudulent, that were raising money for AIDS, which were really raising money for themselves. So Nobby Gilmore, who headed up the AIDS Secretariat, said to us if we would create a foundation. So a bunch of prominent Canadians came together, and we found and then we sat at a board meeting, and we said, geez, we got to raise some money. Well, in Toronto, how do you raise money? Well, you go to the hotel and you rent a ballroom and you charge $500 a head or something, and you raise a bunch of money. Well, the problem with the cause and the ballroom was that maybe nobody'd show up. Now, maybe people buy a ticket, but nobody'd show up, and the worst thing we could have was a picture of an empty ballroom. So somebody much wiser than I came up with the idea, why don't we ask people in the nice part of town to open their houses for a dozen for dinner, and there'll be houses that have Snoop appeal, and why don't we do that? And then we would only open the number of houses we sold tickets for, so you could never have a failure. Worked fantastic, raised $100,000. First year, it worked great. And on and on. So Blue Ocean works in any organization, large or small, if you think about it. If you think about committing to finding a new value proposition that has never been there before and use the skills and talents that are available, you can do this too. When I started my business, none of these businesses existed. None of them existed. Hard to believe today. Now, there's been a lot more since then, but mutual funds didn't exist. Cell phones didn't exist. None of that existed. So blue oceans are possible. They continue to be possibles. Facebook is a great example. Never existed. Suddenly it's multi-billions of dollars. Computers. Everything started in a garage. Everything started by somebody just like you saying, we ought to try this. When I was running Second Cup, I remember a guy coming up to the store to buy a cup of coffee, and I was busy pouring coffee for other people, and he was sort of in the line, and I didn't pay any attention, and he got there, and I realized it's somebody I knew, somebody I used to sell construction equipment with. Name was Bob Green. And he kind of laughed at me and said, tell me, Frank, how are you going to make $1 million out of this little store? Well, he's still selling construction equipment. People will give you a hard time, and people will tell you that it won't work, and people will tell you all that. But if you do your research and you think carefully about it, you too can create and be the leader in the next new industry. Where will you find your blue ocean? Let me tell you 2 stories about what I'm doing currently, which I think are blue oceans. I don't know yet because I don't know. The customers haven't told me yet, but I think they are. The first one I've been working at for about 5 years. It's creating a solution for the developing world for affordable housing. Now we're working in Brazil. Why Brazil? Because A, they need 8 million houses today. They need to build 37 million by 2030. So there's a market. They created a financing vehicle for low-income housing for people who wish to buy them. So there's a system to finance them. There's a long history of companies working in Brazil and Canada, so there's a trade relationship and money can flow back and forth without difficulty, so there's a decent financial environment. We're bringing North American technology and beyond to Brazil to apply to affordable housing. Never been heard of before. Brazil is like many of the countries, and I'm sure many of you have been to developing countries and you've seen them. They build out of cement blocks that are not necessarily square, that are not necessarily true, and then slowly they build the wall, and once the wall is built and they get it all stabilized, somebody comes along and breaks the wall to put in the plumbing, and then they patch all that very nicely, and then the next guy comes along and breaks the wall and puts in the electrical, and then they patch that, and it's a very long, cumbersome, difficult process, but they've been doing that for 100 years and continue to do that for another 100 years. The value proposition we're bringing is changing that market entirely. Build a much better house, much faster, using North American technology, plus solar power for lighting, plus amenities that they've never seen before, and still be able to do it at the same price. Why? Because we can do it about 1/3 of the time. Labor goes away. So we can build a better house, faster, for the customers, and the financing system is there. I think we'll own a market. I think we'll own a market, and I think we have as long a runway as we want for as many years as we want. There are 8 million short right now, so there's no shortage of doing it. And the way we created our model is we do not build a single house. We design them, we bring the technology, and then we partner with local, very large construction firms who do all the construction, deal with all the labor, and all those things that we know nothing about. Finding right partners to great value is what we're doing in Brazil. We'll own a market, make a ton of money, and provide housing for people who otherwise could not afford them. It's a great value proposition. The next idea is only 6 months old. Again, I have no idea what the market is, and I don't know if it'll be successful. I must say that, and I hasten to add, that not everything I've started has been successful. There have been tons of failures. Well, tons. There have been enough failures to feel painful. I started an air ambulance business that blew up, and I started a vidi wall system for shopping centers all across the country that blew up, and lots of things. But I've started many that have been successful. The idea that I'm working on today is called YIPIT, Y-P-I-T. It occurred to us, actually, I got a moment, I'll tell the story. My daughter, who, as I said, in show jumping, came up to me at the Royal Winter Fair in Toronto on last November and said to me, Dad, there's a little booth outside that's selling bracelets and you can have your horse's name put on it. Can I have one? How much? 20 bucks, and off she went. And I turned to my colleague there who has 2 daughters, so twice the problem. And I said, wouldn't it be nice if our kids could earn a little bit of money so they could contribute at least to some of these ancillary things? Wouldn't it be nice if they could have some way to earn a little bit and get a job? Well, the problem with kids that are in high performance sport, especially show jumping, is you're either going to the barn, practicing, coming home from the barn, and show jumping happens all summer long. When do you get a job? How does that work? Matt, who is my buddy sitting beside me, came out of Nortel and he said, why don't we use our kids for outsourcing? We send stuff to India. Why don't we use our kids? This is the first generation of kids that are completely computer native. They're not like you and I that are computer immigrants, but they're computer natives. They have been on computers since they were 3 or less. They're very bright. They have all kinds of skills and abilities that we hardly even understand. And yet they're sitting there, and there's 2.1 million of them in Canada. Kids between 14 and 18 in high school, and then there's another million in university up to 24. A huge resource. I have friends in Toronto who run big law firms, and they're sending documents over to India to be scanned and labeled and put in the cloud and brought back and digitized. We have digitization requirements all across the land. I was talking to some people in Brampton the other day, and they have 116 languages in that city, and they were thinking that their website could be in 116 languages tomorrow. All we need to do is put a bunch of kids on it, and they would have it done. It would cost very little. We decided that we can't exploit kids, of course, so we said, let's make this sustainable, but let's make it important. So we said to ourselves, we'll pay our kids minimum wage. No matter where they are, we'll pay them minimum wage plus $2 an hour. And the $2 an hour goes into an education fund. So when they come out of high school, they have a bit of money saved for college or university. By our calculation, if they work for us through high school, they'll have $4,000 to $8,000 put away for college education. We'll donate 10 cents an hour back to the schools the kids come out of for a tech fund so we can put computers in schools. Kids all across the land could be treated exactly the same. It wouldn't matter if you're in Fort Mac or Toronto. It wouldn't matter if you're in Calgary or Nova Scotia. And it wouldn't matter if you're male or female or disabled or able. You get paid the same thing. Our kids could work from home, and how many people in the rural areas can even get a job? A friend of mine who has 4 young girls, all brilliant, doing well at school. They live in Parry Sound, or now Point of Barrel, which is 30 miles from Parry Sound, the closest place that could even get a job. Parents have to drive them to Parry Sound. They have to drive them home, and the $10 they made gone in gas. This way they can work at home. We built in all kinds of systems to make sure that it's absolutely high quality. The beauty of working at home and breaking things into small pieces, we can have a bunch of kids look at the same piece so you know that you got 99.9% accuracy. Great, great, great idea. Haven't got a single customer yet, but I got great idea. But I believe it. I believe it's there because there's a value there that is being unrecognized. And if we can break through that, there are 20 million kids in the States, and there's 8 million in the UK, and The EU just announced a $6 billion fund for youth unemployment. Everybody's focused on youth unemployment. We don't have as much a problem here, although we do. But the world has a huge problem. And the beauty of our kids when they come out is we have built into our system education. We teach them things they don't learn at school, like financial literacy, like scheduling, like understanding how to show up for work, and like making commitments to show up for work, and all those kinds of things you don't learn at school. And the other thing is, when they come out of our system, they'll have a CV. My daughter's 19 years old and out looking for a job. She fortunately got one, but everybody said, what's your experience? She didn't have any. This way our kids will have experience. I think it's a great idea. We'll have to see if it'll actually work or not. But I think it will. So what does it take? What does it take? Well, in Yipit, I created the idea with my buddy Matt, and we talked about it and we talked about it for a while. Then I found a champion. Guy that works for me, his name's Omar Chaudhry. He's an engineer by training, and I talked about the idea, and he decided he'd like to be president of that company. He's taken that on, and he's focused on it. Now, we managed to get a patent on the whole process, and that took us 4 or 5 months, but we worked through. There isn't a single organization in the world doing what we're doing. So we got a patent on it. We're looking at a couple other patents, and because he's engineering by training, he's good at that, so he did all that. We organized it. We've got all kinds of systems built in to make sure that the quality control is there. He's built all that. I found a champion, just like the guy at Samsung did too. He knew he wanted to do it. He found a champion. So I don't know my audience. I met a few of you, but for the most part, I don't know who you are or what you do, other than you're in the agricultural business. I'm pretty sure of that. But if your organization is in a red ocean and you're thinking about doing something, I don't think you change anything. You do what you do because you probably do it pretty well. But you find a leader who says, yes, we ought to do this, and you get some resources and you find a champion and you begin looking. It may take a couple of years. You got to have patience. And then there are some people in the world today that have been trained at INSEAD that are extremely good at this. So if you're the kind of organization that wants to outsource a bit of this and get some help, there's a guy named Jason Hunter, for example, in Chicago, who is a PhD, trained under Chan Kim and Renee Morn, and there are others, but he is particularly good at this. And he can come to your organization, he can have a chat with you, and take you down this road. It isn't easy, and you won't get up tomorrow and figure out that you got a new idea, but it does take leadership and commitment. And if you've got that, and you really want to do it, you can create your own value proposition that creates a blue ocean, a place where the competition is irrelevant, a place where you get to write your own rules, a place that you can see double and triple digit growth if you get it right. And that's worth doing. And then apart from all of that, which is the great business reasons for doing it, we as Canadians really need to do more about creating new ideas, new businesses. Stop emulating the guy down the street. Any one of us can go get a lease and buy a bunch of equipment and open a restaurant. Way to go. You haven't done anything except open a restaurant. But at the end of the day, isn't it important to leave a legacy, to change the universe that we live in? That's important stuff. That's the opportunity that we face with Blue Ocean Strategy. And where else but Alberta? Where else but right here in this province with the comments I said at the opening, can do, will do. It's over to you. Now I know all of you are working as hard as you can, finding additional headspace, resources, time and money ain't easy. So it does take that kind of commitment. So I wish you well, and I close with a piece from Desiderata, just to leave a little spirituality in the room. And it goes like this. Beyond a wholesome discipline, be gentle with yourself. You're a child of the universe, no less than the trees and stars. You have a right to be here. And whether or not is clear to you, no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should. Therefore, trust your God, whatever you conceive him to be, and whatever your labors and aspirations, the noisy confusion of life, keep peace with your soul. For all its sham, drudgery, and yes, broken dreams, it's still a beautiful world. So be careful and strive to be happy. God bless you. Thanks very much. It's been fun.